Paul Meyer said, communication, which is the human connection, is the key to personal and career success. Happy to have Amy Bruske on the show today. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Relentless, commonly defined as oppressively constant, determined, showing no abatement of severity, intensity, strength, or pace. I believe relentless is an ethos. You're not stopping until you get what you want. You're not taking no for an answer. No obstacle will deter you from your goals. Relentless mentality is where we get to tap into the mindset of change agents, leaders, and icons. My hope is that their stories will inspire and motivate others to transform their mentality in their profession, their personal life, and ultimately their communities. So remember, when it's tough, will you give up or will you be relentless?
So Amy is the president of Kolbe Corporation, an experienced speaker, executive consultant, and entrepreneur. She was named Small Business Owner of the Year by the National Association of Women Business Owners. In 2012, Amy was appointed chairman of the board for the Center of Conative Abilities. And in 2017, she co-authored the groundbreaking family business book, Business is Business, with her stepmother, Kathy Kolbe.
That's right.
Very cool. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm super excited to have you on here. So I've never told you this before, but one of the things I really respect and I think is one of your biggest gifts is your presence. Like, you walk into rooms and you can just take over a room, and it doesn't matter who's in there. It can be anybody from any walk of life, and I think it's an amazing thing that you have. And so I really respect it. You came into our group and our team at Bayless and gave a presentation one time, and I never gave you this feedback, but you just took over the room full of doctors and all these folks, and by the end everybody was just, their jaw was dropped, and I really appreciate that about you. I think it's awesome.
Great. I have not heard that before, so I like that.
Well,
I think it was years of ballet training where you walk in strong or something, yeah.
Well, can we start from the beginning? So
sure.
I know you were born in Argentina, but I kind of want to hear how you've become the president of Kolbe and you know, how you're doing the things today to now writing books and kind of changing the way that people communicate within their personal and professional lives.
Great. Okay. There's so much to tell. You want to start all the way at the beginning?
Sure.
Yeah. So I grew up in Argentina. My father was an international banker. So he was opening up all the city corps in South America. And I was only there till I was 8. But I do always say to people, growing up in another country, seeing extreme poverty, but then a lot of wealth, all those kinds of things, it's driven me to travel, to understand other people. It's been a big part of what I strive to do with my own kids. So that was a big deal. At the point where we moved back to the States, then that was the first time really I'd been an American kid, but I lived in the States for the first time at 8 years old. So there was a lot of dragging me into the bathroom and making me speak Spanish, and I was very different. People teased me about whatever clothes I had, so that was an interesting transition for me, and I very quickly decided I'm never speaking Spanish again. I told my parents, even though we were very bilingual. Well, actually trilingual, because we spoke Portuguese too. But I wanted to assimilate and fit in as soon as possible. And I think that's kind of been a trend even in my family, because I was very different than my family, 2 very accomplished parents and always trying to be like them.
Okay, so what did your parents do?
So my dad was the banker. Yep, so he was an executive for Citicorp. My mother was, she had gone to Stanford Law School and then decided I'm not going to do the law thing. Moved to South America, and you can imagine in the 60s, women were not working in South America. So my dad said, if you want a job, I can get you a job at the bank, but you're going to have to be in the back counting money. That was it. You couldn't be seen if you were a woman. So she was an entrepreneur. She started La Leche League in South America, which is an organization that's still around today in the U.S. that supports breastfeeding for women. And back then, if you breastfed, it meant you were poor, right? If you couldn't afford formula, it was a big deal. So she worked to end the stigma, improve health, those kinds of things.
Wow. And are you only child or?
Nope, I'm middle child of 2 other siblings. So I've got an older and a younger brother.
Okay, so you were the middle child in South America. Dad's a banker. He's busy working, and mom is helping improve the stigma around women and basically breastfeeding and so forth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did you work with Dad in the summer? How did you get that? You know, we have this thing on the show where we wonder sometimes, is entrepreneurship genetic or is it learned?
Right.
And so I have this debate with people all the time. So where do you think you got that from?
That's a great question, because now you're taking me back to the time when he would have to go to New York every year for specific trips and meet people, dignitaries from all over. And as kids, we got to rotate who got to go with him. And I have very, very specific memories of, bowing to Japanese businessmen. And he would take me to these cocktail parties where I'd be the only kid in the room. So if you were going to go on a trip with Dad, you had to go to all the business stuff too. And you learned to just hear everything that's being said and change the way that you approach people. And I learned a lot by that. And then I would go, he was an executive at the bank here in Arizona, and I would go and work with him sometimes in the summer too.
So it sounded like both of them had the work ethic and kind of instilled that into you, and you were exposed to certainly corporate, not only America, but corporate internationally, kind of different cultures and so forth. So.
Right. And when they moved here, then my mom worked for Motorola. But she always figured out how to be a mother and then also work at the same time. So she had taken years off with us and then slowly went back to work as we were going to school. So I saw her struggle with the juggling thing, and she worked it out. So I didn't have any other friends whose moms were working. That was a big deal, that she was a working mom and somehow juggled it. So that was a good role model for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
So fast forward, you went to Loyola Marymount, and what did you study?
I studied business.
So natural,
natural general thing. What I really wanted to do is study psychology.
Okay.
That's what fascinates me. Human behavior fascinates me, but I thought, I don't want to be a therapist, so why would I go be a psych major? So that's what I wanted, but I thought business is great. I love doing business, but now I have something where I do both at the same time, right?
Yeah.
It's human behavior, but at work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So graduated from LMU, and then what?
Then I graduated on a Saturday. By Monday, I had a full-time job. All my friends went and traveled Europe, and I kind of blew it and just started working right away. But I was one of the youngest people working for Jenny Craig weight loss centers, and they were growing like crazy. So I started working as a trainer. I was training weight loss counselors. Then I went to the corporate office. They put me in the franchise department, which was fascinating because I got to be there when they sold a franchise, train the operations people, go back and do audits. I was there for when they bought back franchises, so I saw it done well and I saw it done poorly. It was kind of my first exposure to family business too, because there's a lot of franchisees that were just buying a business for a kid. So I got to see a lot of interesting stuff there, and I traveled 80% of the time. I moved 5 times in 5 years. It was the best boot camp. It was like boot camp for me. I got to learn everything.
So it's kind of a common thread too, I've noticed with entrepreneurs that we have on the show, is that usually some of their first jobs were in a sales or a role where they had to learn how to deal with different types of people, and then they learned how to put together operations, right? Whether it's through a franchise model like or maybe in the government where they learned how to put together operations within different departments. And so that's another common thread I wanted to point out to some folks that watch the show, is that we have a lot of folks who had that initial job. By the way, I had the same dream of graduating college and going and travel, and worked immediately upon graduation.
And never stopped,
and so now I'm trying to catch up from that. But okay, so then how did you get to Colby? And we'll talk a little bit about Colby.
Yeah, so I got to Colby because I was miserable in my corporate job at Jenny Craig. So although it was interesting and I learned a ton, I was making lots of money, I was traveling. Kathy Kolbe, who became my stepmother, at one point she said to me, how do you define success? Because I was very successful, I was making tons of money. I took every promotion they gave me. I just said yes to everything, which I'm really glad I did that. So on the outside, it looked like I was really successful. Inside, I was miserable every day, and I didn't know why. It wasn't until she said to me, I define success as the freedom to be myself. And it was the biggest light bulb. It was the aha that I have no freedom to be myself.
So success is defined as the freedom to be yourself.
Yes.
Wow.
And I realized that growing up in a really successful family, watching my parents, dinners at our house was debating politics, and you better not only have an opinion, but have all your facts lined up to justify, like, why is this true? Very structured, very organized, and I was cramming at the last minute. I was always doing well on my tests. I got straight A's through school, and I felt really dumb. I just thought, I'm not smart, because I knew there was something different about me than my family. So I was on this track where it was do the right thing, but I realized the corporate environment was not great for me. So when she said that, I thought, that's it. Like, I've got to figure out my way of getting things done. And I immediately left that job. And since that day, it's really structured how I make all my decisions. And then I ended up working for Colby just part-time. My husband was a professional baseball player. I was having kids. I'm like, we're never going to be able to be a family if I can't figure out how to get off the rat race I was on. So,
so you're doing both the Jenny Craig corporate job.
Oh, yeah.
I know Jim well,
Yep.
and the 2 kids.
Right.
And then,
the 2 kids weren't quite there yet,
Oh, not
but
2
they
kids
were
yet. Okay.
coming. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So I thought, we're going to have kids. How am I going to do this?
Okay.
So I left that job, and I came and I did work for Colby as a sales trainer, because I had years of doing sales training, and I immediately fell in love with it because I knew we were changing lives. I was there and seeing how helping people find the freedom to be themselves and figure out what is your natural way of getting things done. It changed things for me, and so I immediately wanted to be a part of it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So real quick, can you give an overview of Colby?
Sure.
And so folks listening and watching the podcast can kind of understand what Colby is and what do you do?
Yeah, sure. So Colby is an organization. What we do is help people figure out their natural talents as it relates to getting things done. So think of it as this 3 parts of the mind model. There's what you're capable of, or the thinking part of the mind, what you value and want and motivate, or the personality part of the mind. That's that second piece. And then this third piece is how do you naturally do things. So thinking, feeling, doing. This third dimension, I think, has been forgotten because everybody does personality tests, or in school we really focus on how smart you are. And yet, if you're capable of doing something and you want to do something, that does not necessarily mean it comes naturally to you. What I learned about cramming for school is that was my best way of doing things. I'm really good in a crisis. And I was up at 10 o'clock at night starting my studying for the test. And I always thought, I need to be more organized. Every year I set the intention. My New Year's resolution is going to be to get more organized. So I'm sure a lot of you have the same one. I talk to a lot of people that do. And then I realized I still can get the same amount of work done, but I'm energized when I do it in a different way. So at Colby, that's what we do for other people. So we start with the individual, help them discover their strengths, and then we use that information to help them in whatever they care about most. So for some people, that's running my business, figuring out my team. For some people, it's using and hiring. And then people's personal lives, there's a lot about relationships and parenting and kids where we make a difference there too.
Well, I'm a big advocate for Colby. We use it here, and I think it really helps the team understand when there can be some difficulties within the relationships and how they communicate to one another, especially when we have, kind of high stress or situations that are really important and people are really kind of grounded in their beliefs. It's how do you get somebody else to buy in on whatever the intention or initiative might be. So I'm a big believer in Colby, and I thank you guys for helping us.
Absolutely.
I want to talk a little bit more about Colby. So you came over to Colby, and one of the things about the show is talking about your mindset. So when you first came into Colby, what was kind of the first obstacle, especially, family business? I'm in a family business.
That's right.
Our next guest on this show comes from a family business today. So to me, I think there's a lot of obstacles there that people think is pie in the sky. I'm going to work with my spouse or my parent or my brother and sister. Can you talk a little bit about some of the obstacles you experienced?
Sure. Immediately I saw that I had to prove myself. I mean, here's the challenge is it's kind of a no-brainer to think, well, this is great. I'm going to go into the family business. I have something to contribute. They need me. I had not anticipated, because I was the first kid in the business. I also work with my brother, how much of a challenge that might be with other people that are working there. So I had to figure out how to call my dad Will, because that's his real name, and even that kind of a thing in the workplace, it's so basic, but it's setting boundaries. And for a very short time, because my husband and I were building a house and he was on the road, I lived with my parents. And what would end up happening is you go to work all day, and then I came home for that 2-month period, and we talked about business until 11 o'clock at night, and there were no boundaries. And my life was my job. And you can't necessarily do that. So we had to set boundaries on just when we were at work, it was at work. I had to prove myself, which was totally legitimate and appropriate. And people needed to know, what am I bringing to the table? And we had to stop talking business outside of the office because it wasn't fun for the rest of our family. You go to Thanksgiving dinner, nobody wants to hear about the fact that you had to fire someone. The rest of our family members didn't. So I learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work, and about my credibility to clients. So here I'm coming into the business, and clients, and we work with major corporations and other clients saying, oh, you're bringing your kid into the business and now you want to pawn them off on me. So that was tough too.
So I love the book. There's a lot of stuff that I feel like resonated with me, but the one thing that I think with with you guys at Colby is you talk about choosing people to come in the business based on their values.
Yes.
And identifying the values in advance and making sure it's the right fit, or you can really set yourself up for catastrophe. So how did Kathy and you and David identify that and figure it out from the beginning? You know, how did you do that?
I think there was a lot of talk about what are you passionate about, and I knew it was an immediate fit for me. My brother had been a lawyer, and so it was kind of what part of the business even makes sense for you. But just because I think people think because I grew up in the same family or we go to church together that somehow you have the same business values, and you don't. You have to talk about how you spend money. I mean, down to what are we going to spend money on as a business? What level of risk are we willing to take? Are you willing to financially invest yourself? All of those kinds of things. So the values fit is critical for any employee in a business, but if it's a family member, it's a deal breaker.
Yeah. So when did you guys, you know, along that path, obviously there's probably been a situation where you guys have had to come together and say, okay, everybody's not swimming in the same direction here. When did you feel like you figured that kind of special sauce out? Working with my dad, it took us years to kind of figure that out. When did you guys figure that out, and is it still ongoing where it still comes up from time to time?
There are still some things that come up, but I think once we established, you know, we love the phrase stay in your lane. The good news is we all have very unique talents and gifts, and we're in charge of different parts of the business. That makes it easy. So my stepbrother and I now run the business together. He's a lawyer, he's a finance guy, he's a tech guy, that's his thing. I'm in sales and customer relations and the conceptual side of stuff. That makes it a little bit easier once we could define that. And staff members sometimes do an end run around one family member to get to another, and we weren't aware of that in the beginning, and we had to very quickly shut that down. The transition of Kathy moving out of the day-to-day running of the business was pretty wild and interesting, and we write a lot about that in the book, because entrepreneurs want to move on to the next thing and get out of the business, but that's really hard to do.
And it's hard for everybody else too.
Yep.
It's hard for everybody that's been there with
right.
the entrepreneur while they've built the business or the baby, you know, and took it from, you know, infancy to adulthood.
So one of the stories that people tell me resonates with them the most is what we call the pizza story in the book, because Kathy Kolbe decided, I can't work at the business anymore, I'll just come back some of the time. She had a lot of passion for projects related to what we do, but with kids, you know, education, kids, health, all those kinds of things. But every time she'd come back into the business, even for a meeting, it was tricky. So one time she came to a staff meeting and I had ordered pizza, and she actually came over and started saying, you didn't order enough meat pizza, and there's this, and she was questioning how many I ordered, what types I ordered. It was, to me, so ludicrous, but of course to her it wasn't necessarily. So I dragged her into the other room and I said, are we gonna have a conversation about the pizza? I mean, how badly could I screw this up? Because if you can't trust me to order the pizza, then you cannot trust me to run this business. So that was so eye-opening for her, and she said, I can't keep coming back. I really need to separate completely. Because she knew there was no way she could stop criticizing the pizza ordering. I mean, down to that level. So I think people keep trying to work on just stay out of the pizza level decisions. It's very difficult and almost impossible for some people. So our big joke now is this a pizza level decision? Like that became like the threshold. What happened, and what she recommends to all entrepreneurs, is you got to get out. And yet, what are you going to do? She had the next step for her. Most entrepreneurs don't know what the next step is.
And how to disassociate themselves from being the owner of the business and being
That's
themselves.
Right.
And that's
and
why I love that quote earlier. She said that success is the freedom to be yourself.
Oof, that doesn't stop when you run out of this business. You got to keep going, because most entrepreneurs can't ever retire. That's not a thing. They think they are going to. It doesn't happen.
No. So, okay. So can we talk a little bit about being the president of Colby and being a mom and a wife, and how do you balance all of that? And your daughter's going off to school. I know you guys are excited about that.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I heard an interesting quote the other day. Someone said there's no such thing as work-life balance. There's only work-life integration. And I thought, I wish I would have heard that sooner, because I think that's a big part of it. Yes, I now have a 22-year-old and an 18-year-old, and they're both moving on to the next thing in their lives. And the juggling is really interesting, but it wouldn't work if I didn't have a partner. So he traveled for years for baseball, and I kind of stepped back and said, okay, I'm going to keep working, but I got to figure this out, so that this is your one time. You can only be young and playing for a while. I kept working and worked a lot in the off season, But then once he was retired, then I said, okay, I need to be able to travel for my work and do those kinds of things now. And so the timing had to be right. My kids became very independent very quickly, and I think that was great. Every once in a while I got all the other moms baked cookies and, you know, whatever kind of thing, and I'm like, okay, there's this or there's this, and I would say to my kids, I want to spend time with you or I'm going to bake cookies. Like, what is what's the deal? What's most important? And they got it. So I try never to be gone more than, when they were little especially, I tried never to be gone more than 1 or 2 nights. Okay. And I was able to do that most of the time. But now it's an interesting time in my life because I thought I was really going to dread the empty nest thing, and my daughter's just going to college in a few months, so she's really still at home, but all of a sudden it's opening up a lot of possibilities. So now I have just this list of, I can go back and do more charity work, and I have these work projects I want to do, and travel and all of that. So
what advice would you give to, you know, somebody else watching this that is going through that work-life integration kind of stress and trying to figure out, maybe, you know, with their spouse, they're trying to make that switch and they now have the opportunity. What advice would you give them? Okay,
so one of the things that I think I've figured out is it is not just about time. Everybody thinks, well, do I have the time to do this or not? It is about managing mental energy. That has been a game changer for me. You only have a certain amount of energy to get things done. So even if you have the time, so for example, I don't naturally do things in a very detailed and structured way. Okay. So if I'm going to spend a lot of that energy on stuff for my kids' school, or, you know, all the paperwork you have to fill out, that kind of thing, it's going to have to give somewhere else at in my job. So it's the saying no to things, not just because this isn't something I should get involved in the business or I don't have the time to do it. It's saying no to the stuff that drains your mental energy. Wow. And that has been a game changer for me. So I'm very strategic about, you know, we're planning a vacation right now with the kids before they go to school. And my husband said, we really need to get down and do all this research. And I'm like, I'm smack dab in the middle of a research project at work. I will be able to do that this weekend, but tonight I don't have it. Yeah. So you know that feeling when you kind of hit a wall? Yeah. Like it's not a physical thing, it's my mind can't take any more of this. Yeah. That's what you do. You start saying no to the things because you don't have the energy for it.
So it's interesting because I believe Colby helps me identify when I'm in those situations now. Yeah. Because I find myself going, this is not something that is really something that I'm good at, nor is it something that won't be draining to me, as you were talking about with mental energy. So as a team, we now discuss that, and my wife and I did the A to A index as well, and so we know sometimes when we hit certain situations, we're able to talk through, you know, I'm a serious quick start in Colby, and I'm not going to sit there and do quite a bit of the fact finding like you're talking about for certain research. Certain things that I enjoy, I will. Sure. But I think that's a real tool that helps people really use that mental energy for their personal and professional lives. So I think that's awesome advice.
I think there's some really bad advice that people get when they're young, and that is anything worth doing is worth doing well. That is just crap. Sorry, I hope I can say that. Yeah, no, I could say worse. If you have that mindset that anything worth doing is worth doing well, it's not real life. It's not possible. And a lot of parents say that to their kids, and there is some work that deserves your quality efforts and your best efforts. But that's not reality. So we feel this guilt of, I'm capable of doing this, I should do more of this. Yeah. And so the minute you stop listening to, we call that good advice gone bad. My brother and I are writing a book right now called Good Advice Gone Bad, because we see how much people get, it sounds great on the surface, but it gets taken too far. Yeah. And it's not very realistic. Okay. So, yeah.
So switching gears a little bit. So you've done a great job. You've got both of your kids. They're out, basically going to be out of the house here shortly. Right. What is for you within Colby, personal, professional, your biggest win so far? Where have you said, you know what, this has been an achievement that I'm most proud of?
Oh boy, that's really hard. It's hard to say like there's one thing because I'm a constant learner. So my thing is there's more to do. I think making the transition and now running the business fully and having a staff that is so dedicated to what we do is huge. But when we had clients that call us now and say, okay, a founder of a business who's very well known, you know, she's been in Time magazine, she's got all these national accolades, that it is okay for them to work with us. Not only that, but they love what we're doing. That was huge. So that transition was a big deal. But honestly, the wins are the day-to-day making a difference in people's lives. I mean, that's what keeps me going, because I don't want to meet with anyone else who's 55 years old and say, I hate my job so much, I wish I would have known this sooner. Yeah. Like, I want to make a difference with kids. Yeah. and youth understanding how to build on their strengths, and businesses knowing that you're going to increase engagement if you just do this. It's a win for everybody. Your employees want to be there. So for me, the daily getting to hear, you've saved my marriage, you've changed my life, I hated my job and now I get it, and I thought I was broken and I needed to change myself. So that's kind of the everyday stuff I get to deal with. Yeah.
Okay, great. So at the end, we usually wrap up with some questions, and I had some specific questions for you.
Okay.
And you talked a little bit about, before I even go to that, you talked a little bit about kids and developing the future. So, you know, there's obviously a transition going on in our society where boomers are moving more out of the workforce and more millennials are moving, and even Zs are coming into the workforce at this point. So what do you think we need to do to start developing the next generation of the workforce to get into positions of leadership and kind of transform the status quo in all different industries?
Yeah. And this affects everybody, right? I don't care if you have kids. Everyone needs to think about this. But those of us that have children, I talk to a lot of people who have built wealth, and they think, I'm spoiling my kids, I'm giving them things I never had. They haven't had to have the struggles that I have had, and I get that, because I do think that growing up and making your own way is a big deal. But no matter what situation you're in, we have to develop problem solvers, and that's what's not happening. It's not about giving kids things, like I'm giving them material things, therefore they're spoiled, they won't have to work for it. I think what's happening is we're taking away the ability to problem solve at a very young age and fail. It's more I don't want my kid to feel hurt, so they didn't get invited to a birthday party, or this teacher's not treating them well, so immediately jumping in and dealing with the situation. Those are the everyday things that we can do to step back and say, if they struggle and things are challenging and they get through it on their own, there's this confidence that you now have that you can do it on your own. So I think we went so far with self-esteem that I'm just going to tell someone how great they are, and therefore they're going to internalize that, and all of a sudden they're going to do well. But the opposite happens. Either you're going to develop an arrogant child, because you're going to tell them, and arrogance is absolutely a challenge in the workplace, or you're going to develop someone that they know they can't do it. You're telling them you can do it, yes, you're so great at this, they know they're not deep down inside. So self-efficacy is where you put someone in a situation, they struggle, they get through it, and they get confidence through doing that. So there's just that switch, and it's just not natural as parents to see your child struggle and fail and be sad and hurt. So you're there to support them, but you start letting them kind of go through it and problem solve on their own.
So I have to ask this because it's fascinating. So what do you think about the current education system in being able to identify people's learning styles and using, you know, like a index like Colby to help people understand, I may not learn the same way that you're teaching this type of curriculum or information. What do you think about that?
Part of the challenge is we have so many kids in every classroom, and the teachers have a huge struggle. What would be ideal is if we really did understand how to teach each unique individual. I think we're doing a really poor job of that. But if we could put Colby in the schools, and we are doing that with a lot of school systems, we have entire states doing some of that. What a difference it is. But instead of trying to change the teachers, which I think is really a struggle, and Kathy Kolbe has done that for years, and she said it's kind of like, you know, beating your head against a brick wall. We're not going to change an entire institution that the teachers look very similar. We know what they look like, and so they're going to say, this worked for me, let me help you out. So there's no diversity in method. But if you teach the kid about their own personal strengths, then that child can advocate for themselves. They find workarounds, they figure out how to do things, problem solve, and do things a little differently. So I think that's, you know, I love the word relentless that you're using. To me, it's very close, if not the same thing as resilience. Building resilience is that by the time your children are older, they have developed confidence that they can get things done on their own. And that's some great stuff and some struggles, and you're there to support them through all of that. And I think that's huge. It's hard to do, but
we could talk all day. So I have to ask you these three questions, which I think I may know the answers to them. But who inspires you?
I don't know if you know the answer to that, because that's really tough. I mean, I will say that Kathy Kolbe has been a huge mentor for me. She changed my life, and I get to be related to her too. People think it's so strange that a stepmother and daughter would write a book together. We're definitely an unusual duo. She has definitely inspired me. She and my father both. I mean, 78, 79 years old, still working, still striving, I think that's huge.
Okay.
I want to be able to do that. Yeah.
Okay. So what are you most proud of now?
Well, I'm certainly proud of my kids and my family and our ability to just we have a blended family, first of all, which is really cool, and we're all really close. Proud professionally of the fact that I'm just still growing and learning, and I learn something from my clients every day. So I'm proud of the fact that I've figured out how to find a job that I love. I mean, people often talk about what motivates you. It's like, gosh, if you have a job you love, it's so joyful and easy to do. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about what's next. It sounds like you have another book coming out with David.
Yes.
And so anything else you want to share about what's next in your world?
No, I mean, the book is about getting people to stop struggling and get them to the point where I got faster. I just want people to start understanding how to take in everything that's coming at them and understand your own strengths enough in order to apply some of that advice well.
Okay.
Yeah, but otherwise, we're just going to keep growing, and we're doing a lot with personal relationships right now, because I think that's huge. So whether it's marriages or parenting, I think that's the foundation for everything you do in your work life. So that's really what's next for us.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think if you're ever considering getting in a family business, Business is a Business is a great resource. Amy Bruske and the team at Colby are a great resource, and I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your story, Amy. And
thank you.
I hope to see you and Jim again this summer at some point. And
Absolutely.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw today, please subscribe in the links below. And remember, never to quit, always be relentless.